Good evening. Welcome to each and every one of you. First and foremost, thanks to our very generous sponsors, Northwest Women's Clinic and Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare. If there are people here from either of the organizations, please raise your hands. We would like to recognize you and thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. Thanks to Intel for letting us use this wonderful auditorium for free. Thanks to our wonderful photographer, Andrea, and videographer, Kai, and his team for creating memories that we will cherish forever. And thanks most of all to each and every one of you for making time in this beautiful spring evening to come indoors and join us in this journey that we're going to embark on together tonight. My name is Gayatri Ramprasad. I'm the founder and president of ASHA International, a Portland-based nonprofit organization. Our mission is to promote personal, organizational, and community wellness through mental health education, training, and support. Our vision is to create communities of empathy, support, and inclusion, where every man, woman, and child struggling with a mental health condition can find the love and support they need to recover and realize their fullest potential. Since the launch of our programs in 2006, we've had the incredible opportunity to reach more than 50,000 people, both nationally and around the world, through our programs and publications. When I reflect on the last 11 years of our outreach and ask myself this one question, what is the one thing that has had the most impact in the lives of those that we have served across the world up to date? The one thing. And it always comes back to the power of stories. A stranger's story saved my life. I was born and raised in Bangalore, India, amidst ancient traditions and a very large, loving, extended family of 23 people, grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. My happy childhood, however, gave way to a very traumatic adolescence. By the time I was 18, I was debilitated by panic attacks and anxiety. As a young mother here in Portland, Oregon, my life became a blur of doctor visits, medications, hospitalizations, and failed suicide attempts. I tried and tried, but I could not free myself from the death hold of depression. And as many people around the world struggling with a mental illness, after years of incredible trauma and struggle, I gave up hope for recovery. And it is then, in April 1989, that a stranger came to visit me in the most unlikely of places, a psychiatric ward. Her name was Aida. Aida was my husband's boss's mother-in-law's friend. She was visiting from Los Angeles and had overheard Ralph, my husband's boss at that point in time here at Intel, tell his wife Karen about my recent suicide attempt and hospitalization at OHSU. And Aida had insisted on coming and seeing me. In the few minutes that Aida held me in her arms and shared her struggles with depression and her relentless pursuit of recovery, she gave me the gift of hope that changed my life forever. Because until I met Aida, my only perception of a person with mental illness was that of a half-naked woman running down the streets of my hometown, Bangalore. Dogs chasing her, people pelting stones, calling her Hoochie. And here was this incredibly gracious, graceful woman who had come to hold me in her arms and share her struggles, if nothing, to give me hope, to let me know that I wasn't alone. All that Aida wanted that day was me to promise her that no matter how dark things got, no matter how hopeless I felt, that I had the strength within me to recover and create a beautiful life for myself. And all she wanted for me was to promise her that I would never kill myself. I'm glad I promised Aida, and I'm glad that I have held my promise. Because you see, meeting Aida was the first moment in my life that recovery became a possibility. And that hope that was born that day is the gift that I am determined to share and pass it forward to every person that I am called upon to meet through my work through ASHA International. ASHA International as I mentioned, is a nonprofit organization based right here in Portland, Oregon. Asha literally means hope in Sanskrit, one of the world's most ancient languages that originated in my home country, India. And in English, it's an acronym for a source of hope for all. And that's exactly what we aspire to give people that we are called upon to serve. I met Aida for the very last time on March 12th, 2014. Even though she was in a wheelchair, she came to bless me and celebrate my book launch at the Powell City of Books. Aida died 4 months later, but her legacy of hope will live on forever. Over the years, I have witnessed the power of personal stories to save lives and create social change. Stories connect us and comfort us in our shared struggles. They help us know that we're not alone and give us hope to cope, survive, and thrive. Personal stories also have the power to create social change, whether it is changing social perceptions and attitudes towards mental illness, influencing how people perceive and treat people with mental health conditions, and of course, advocating for changes in public policies. But disclosing our struggles with mental health conditions can be a terrifying experience because of the consequences, both personal and professional. The stigma surrounding mental health often prevents people from seeking the very life-saving treatment and supports that they need. At Asha International, we are dedicated to destigmatizing mental illness and promoting mental health and well-being in schools, in workplaces, and in the community through the power of personal stories. This evening, Asha International is delighted to present Grit and Grace, a storytelling show to shine a light on mental health and end stigma, one story at a time. Tonight, 10 fearless storytellers are going to share their journey of courage, hope, and resilience to let us all know that mental health is an integral part of overall well-being, whether we are individuals or organizations or communities around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our first storyteller tonight, Dr. Molly McNabb. Molly has spent much of her adult life in the hospital, first as a medical student, then as a resident physician, then as a patient. Growing up dreaming of becoming a small-town family doctor, Molly never knew that her life would lead to 25 psychiatric hospitalizations and life as an advocate for mental health awareness. Molly is now a physician turned stand-up comic with a group called Mental Health at the Mic, using her life with schizoaffective disorder and life on disability as fodder for laugh-out-loud comedy. Dear friends, please help me welcome Dr. Molly McNabb.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
My name is Molly D. McNabb, MD. Little did I know going through medical school, the MD would actually stand for manic depressive. My journey in the mental health world started at the end of my senior year of college at Oregon State University as I was preparing to leave for medical school in Omaha, Nebraska. It presented itself as a moderate depression. Lots of nights crying over the simplest of things, not wanting to do the fun things I had done for years, and feeling terrible if left alone. This depression was chalked up to leaving my friends and family and moving away. Once I got to Omaha, the depression went into turbo mode. However, being a medical student, I quickly learned that in order to achieve at school, I needed to find a way to compartmentalize my depression into a home thing and put on a public mask that everything was okay. This public persona was happy and well-adjusted, high-functioning, and could study all the anatomy and physiology that was thrown at me. The home persona, the real me, was barely able to function. There were weeks on end that all I ate were instant mashed potatoes, showering was a chore, and it was rare that I wasn't suicidal. It wasn't until my last semester of medical school, January to be exact, that I experienced my first manic episode. I was home alone and decided to invite a stranger, someone who had been stalking me on Facebook, over for sex. which I'd never done before. He didn't leave for several days, nor did I sleep, and we shopped my bank account near empty. The ideas were flowing through my head rapidly. Then one day, it all stopped. The bottom fell out of my intense feelings, and I sent him home. I came very close to suicide and ended up in a psychiatric hospital for the first time. I thought my medical career was over, but I managed to graduate on time and start residency in family medicine a few months later. My problems weren't over when I started residency. In fact, they were just getting fired up. I only made it about 3 months and was forced to stop because my symptoms were too intense to work. I resigned and took the next 1.5 years to work on getting better and ready to start again. I got healthy and ready and tried at another residency program and did a little better. I made it about 9 months, but alas, was shown the door. My medical career was over. I was crushed, and my bipolar disorder became very difficult to treat as the grief of my job loss became enmeshed with it. Since January 2009, I've been hospitalized 25 times in the psych ward, mostly voluntary, although a handful of times I've had to go involuntarily. I've gone to 2 long-term mental health treatment centers and to a day hospital/partial hospitalization program a handful of times. My bipolar disorder has now morphed into schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, which basically means I have symptoms of schizophrenia, like paranoia, mainly of the FBI following me around and reading my mind, and visual and auditory hallucinations, and then have the bipolar mood swings from time to time. I do a really good job of acting normal in public. I still have that public persona thing I learned in medical school, so many people are shocked when they hear this stuff is going on. This story is not all tragedy, though. In fact, a few years ago, I found stand-up comedy as a way to cope with everything that life had thrown at me. I found that adding a punchline to something so terrible as losing my career I had worked my whole life for made it hurt just a little less every time I told it. And being able to make others laugh with me about my mental illness and some of the silly ways it manifests in my life made it a little easier to accept the hard truth that I'll be dealing with some of this stuff my whole life. I've made jokes about living on welfare, having brain surgeries, living with my mom as an adult, and being a patient with way too much education. Comedy has made it possible for me to have something I'm good at again. And even though I'll probably never make an honest living at it, it is something I can be proud of myself for again, and is an invaluable tool I can use when I need to reframe something difficult in my life. What do I want you to get out of all this? Anyone can have a mental illness. And just because they look fine, doesn't mean they are. Don't judge a person by their diagnosis. I did everything right and still ended up with a serious mental illness. Doctors can be patients too. Doctors are human. Thank you.
Thank you. As Molly said, doctors can be patients too. Doctors are human. In the United States, an estimated average of 28% of medical residents show signs of depression, making them 3 times more likely to be depressed than similarly aged Americans. Suicide rates among physicians is very concerning. But the fear of disclosure and its consequences on their career prevents many from seeking help. Molly is a member of the ASHA Storytellers team and wants to help change the medical culture to honor the humanity of physicians and empower them to share their struggles without fear and seek help. Healers need healing too. Our second storyteller, Jennifer Pepin, was born to an attorney ballerina and discovered a passion for both art and business. After experiencing stigma and prejudice in the workplace, Jen became determined to reframe how people think about mental health. 5 years ago, Jen opened the J. Pepin Art Gallery in the Pearl District. The gallery features artists, including herself, that are living with a mental illness. It is reframing the perception of mental illness by exhibiting the work of professional artists alongside their stories of their creative journeys. She's been awarded the Pathfinder Award by National Alliance for Mental Illness, the Mental Health Hero Award by Trillium Family Services, and the 2017 Hope Bringer Award by ASHA International. Jen has also been featured in news stories for her work to fight stigma. Welcome, Jen.
Hello. According to the World Health Organization, mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Tonight, I am here as someone living with a mental illness, leading a life with good mental health. Some people don't like being diagnosed and feel they're being labeled. For me, it was a relief. My family and I had an explanation and a plan to move forward. But that plan essentially included therapy and taking medications that would make everything better. Unfortunately, I learned it's not that simple. Medication is one piece of it, but one must also create a healthy lifestyle and good habits, including self-care and positive environments. It took me several years after diagnosis to figure this part out. In the meantime, I continued to pursue my dream of being in sales and marketing in the corporate world. I was driven. Some may even say a workaholic. But I would discover that the career I was striving for would end up being one of the most dangerous things for my health. The hours, the travel, the socializing, the erratic sleep pattern. But what made it most challenging was the lack of understanding I would experience. I found myself in environments where confiding that I was living with bipolar disorder had consequences, such as losing pay for too much time at the doctor, or comments or doubt about my abilities, and eventually not having my job. When I shared my struggles with mental health, instead of being faced with consolation and support, I was faced with misunderstanding and prejudice. It opened my eyes to the stigma that exists and how uneducated many people are about what it means to live with mental illness. 1 in 5 people experience a mental health condition. It can affect your friends, family, and colleagues. You can't assume what it looks like. I went for years without anyone in my company knowing. Sadly, the reason people don't know is because of the stigma created and fear of repercussions for simply having a mental health condition. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 8 out of 10 workers with a mental health condition say shame and stigma prevent them from seeking treatment. They fear their boss would interpret it as a lack of interest or unwillingness to do the activity. It would go in their file and affect promotion opportunities. And a fear of being laughed at, not taken seriously, and being labeled weak. After attending the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, it suddenly dawned upon me how much creativity was in that room, and yet also so much stigma people were experiencing. I decided at that time I wanted a space to reframe how people think about mental health, and so Pepin Art Gallery was born.
I didn't realize the stigma that came with mental illness until I was personally faced with it. When people ask me about the gallery, I say that we are like any other gallery in the Pearl District, which is a competitive art district. I opened this space in hopes hopes of showing the beauty that can come with it and provide hope by focusing on the positives. When somebody reads a statement from somebody else and feels better about their own mental health and more confident to talk about it, that's what drove me to open this. To show people that we can lead really healthy, productive, and creative lives.
Because of the support of family, friends, courageous artists, and the community, I'm proud to say that this year we will turn 5 years old. We've come a long way in the discussion around mental health. Recently, a letter that went viral that was a response from a boss to their employee taking a mental health day. The employee's note read, "Hey team, I'm taking today and tomorrow to focus on my mental health. Hopefully I will be back next week refreshed and back to 100%. Her boss's response came as a surprise, but was what one should say. "I just wanted to personally thank you for sending emails like this. Every time you do, I use it as a reminder of the importance of using sick days for mental health. I can't believe this is not standard practice at all organizations. You're an example to us all and help cut through the stigma so we can all bring our whole selves to work." I love how he says whole selves. The World Health Organization defined health in its broader sense as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The fact it went viral as something so unusual shows there is still so much work to be done. Many business leaders assume an employee's mental health is none of their business, but an employee's mental health greatly affects his or her performance, and therefore a company's bottom line. According to the World Health Organization, the estimated cost to the global economy is $1 trillion per year in lost productivity. But treatment works. A report from NAMI, Massachusetts said 75% of those with mental health conditions like depression, anxiety experience reduced symptoms. 80% of employees who receive treatment report improved job satisfaction. It's essential to support employees' efforts to seek treatment for mental health issues. This could include allowing time off for appointments or supporting an employee's need to take on fewer projects while he adjusts to medication. But the most important part is to make it clear to employees that there will not be negative consequences for taking care of their mental health. Organizations that take a stance against stigma show they value their employees' overall well-being. This helps loyalty and retention and can create a positive reputation beyond as well. In a supportive work environment, disclosing a mental health condition is not viewed as a weakness, but rather it is considered a sign of strength. Because the truth is, we all have a mental health, just like we all have a physical health. And that is why businesses should not be afraid to talk about it. And that is why an employee should not be afraid to talk about it. That is why you and I should not be afraid to talk about it. Thank you.
Yes, please, if all our guests will come and get seated. There's plenty of room in the front. And Murli, if you could come help me with the AV for just a moment. Thank you. Just the grit and grace. Grit and grace. Which one? Grit and grace. Thank you, Murli, and thank you for all of your patience as well. And thank you, Jen. Mental health care, as Jen mentioned, is one of the biggest unmet needs of our time. Untreated mental illness has an enormous impact on our global economy, nearly $1 trillion every single year lost in productivity. Jen is a member of the ASHA Storytellers team, and she wants to help end the stigma surrounding mental illness and create a workplace culture where disclosing a mental health condition isn't considered a sign of weakness, and getting help is celebrated as a sign of strength. Creating a mentally healthy workplace boosts employee well-being, productivity, and profitability. It is a win-win-win for all. Our third storyteller, Grace Perley, is a registered nurse dedicated to empowering women create healthy lives. But she has a secret that has long impacted her own well-being. After decades of struggling in silence, Grace believes that talking about our struggles is the first step toward healing. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Grace Perley.
Thank you, Gayatri. And I'd also like to thank Northwest Women's Clinic, the clinic that I've been working for a little over 5 years, for their support for tonight. I've been a registered nurse for over 10 years in women's health and obstetrics. I try to be the kind of nurse that I want, advocating for my family. At times, I could even be called a great nurse. I anticipate my patients' needs. I practice consistent, patient-centered care. But I do have a secret. I've long avoided exposing my weakness for fear of the world's censure. Contrary to my intended protection of silence, however, I'm instead left open to self-doubt, heightened fears, and ultimate failure. Physically, my body breaks down from deep inside. Symptoms arise even while I conceal my illness with an iron will. In condemning myself to quiet suffering, I'm imprisoned by my own secrecy. But this world is my community, and I believe that a break in silence is a step towards healing. Despite exposing my own vulnerability, I'm now trusting you with my own mental illness. And that is clinical anxiety. Mine's not a run-of-the-mill concern that one might experience before a small discomfort. My anxiety is more like the feeling of standing before a firing squad. It's staggering, immobilizing. At other times, it's the relentless worry of abandonment and failure. It shreds my insides without relief. I dread allowing this illness to hold back my hard-fought professional standing. My fear in coming forward with this very private information is that others trust me to be the kind of nurse that they need fighting for them. And will I lose that trust? I come before you today as a patient and also as a nurse, offering a bit of hope that I've discovered amidst my own ongoing battle. That hope is this: transparency brings freedom. Just calling mental illness by its name, I've taken a secret shame and trimmed it into something approachable and even manageable, because illness can be treated. Speaking out allows others to come alongside and to fight a named challenge. Together we become a community with a known purpose. We can follow a heading to begin towards renewal. Each time I'm challenged with my own choking fears, I confront them with all the nerve that I can conjure, relying on my God, my community, and my resources. I use my past experiences to try to build some pattern that might help me scrape through with the least apparent destruction to myself or others. I set attainable goals, study my triggers, and minimize stress by carefully regimenting my schedule and balancing my diet and exercise and hobbies and worship and even sleep. Even then I struggle. It's a daily choice just to continue it all. You, the community, bolster me to face the challenges of my nursing career. I gained strength and encouragement to drive to overcome anxiety from others. I recognize this as my son gives me a sandwich when he realizes that I've not yet eaten. My mom invites me to talk for a few minutes when I wind down on a stressful day. My husband opens his arms to me after the loss of a patient. My co-workers cover my patient load so that I can go for a walk on a rare sunny winter day. As I place my trust in others, I learn to be a better nurse, a better person, and to establish the momentum to proceed. A common theme that I've discovered through the decade that I've analyzed patient treatment is that we cannot fight illness alone. My patient is not just one person. She's the family, the loved ones, the community. I'm faced with the reality that there will come a time when the only things left of our lives are the echoes, reflections, and consequences of our choices. I want my legacy to promote wellness. In place of fear, I choose strength. In place of illness, I choose healing. In place of failure, I choose hope. In place of silence, I speak. I'm healing out loud. Will you?
Thank you, Grace. You know, as Grace said, none of us can fight illness alone. Alone we struggle. Together we thrive. Grace is a member of the Asha Storytellers team and is passionate about starting a conversation about mental health among healthcare professionals so that they too can take care of their well-being even as they help their patients thrive. When I met our fourth storyteller tonight, Yamini Rajan, a couple of months ago, I was absolutely amazed at her courage and candor. After years of struggling with depression, anxiety, and bulimia, she's here to share her story in an effort to raise awareness about a subject that is mostly hidden in the dark. Mental health issues are not going to go away anytime soon, she told me, which is why she hopes to shine a light on the most important topic of her generation and mine. Together, we hope to build a brighter future for all generations here and to come. I present to you Yamini. She's a high school student at Sunset.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Yamini Rajan. I'm 17 years old, and I'm a junior at Sunset High School. I'm here to talk about my long journey with mental health and why I feel starting a conversation on mental health with teens is essential. So my struggle with depression has definitely had its fair share of dark moments, but the absolute worst would have to be my 8th grade year. I'd been depressed for as long as I can remember, but the transition of moving from India to America was extremely rough. I was worried about fitting into American culture and feared being too brown to ever make real friends like the one I had left back home. Combined with my mother getting diagnosed with breast cancer, my solution to my sadness was to completely disassociate with the world and retreat into myself. Drowning in low self-esteem, insecurity, and absolute numbness, I fell into a vicious cycle of self-harm and anger. I was furious with myself for feeling this way and furious with the world for not understanding me. The combination of this rage and my endless guilt resulted in a suicide attempt at age 13. So how did I, the girl who seemed to have it all together, sink so low? The answer is shame. I was so truly ashamed with myself for even daring to feel the way I did. And I was disgusted with the fact that I had the audacity to even think about complaining and just accepted that the dark, ugly feelings were just a part of me. I was embarrassed to ask for help and burdened my loved ones with my pain. I'd always been somewhat of an outcast in social situations. My parents and teachers saw it as me simply being too mature for my age, and my peers just saw it as me not being one of them. I saw it as a fault within myself, something wrong with the way that I was built. As a result, I did anything to fit in. I became a doormat, allowing people to walk all over me, to use me as they saw fit, just so I wouldn't be alone anymore. As I got older, these people-pleasing qualities invaded nearly every one of my relationships. While this resulted in the darkness in my chest growing larger, I simply accepted this as my fate, even though it manifested in panic attacks and suicidal thoughts. Eventually, things became too much, leading me to try and take my own life. Shortly after that, I had a dream in which I visited my own grave and watched my loved one surrounding it in tears. That morning, I woke up and I knew something had got to give. This couldn't be my life. I went to school and told my counselor everything. He asked me how long I had felt like this. After thinking about it for a few moments, I responded, "It feels like forever." Once I opened up to one person, the rest went by fairly quickly. My parents were informed, and I found myself visiting a therapist once a week. The process was painfully slow, and I've had multiple setbacks along the way, but each setback made me stronger. I discovered parts of myself that I hadn't connected with in years. I grew more self-aware, and I rebuilt my relationships with my parents and my little sister, who had spent so much time pushing away. While some days are still a little darker than others, I find myself so much more prepared and confident to face them. I began weekly therapy, and under the guidance of my therapist, I was able to identify which parts of my life were negatively affecting me. My parents and I figured out how to communicate with each other in a more effective way, and I learned how to manage my mood, my dependency on the razor, and diminish the cycle of self-inflicted abuse. I still struggle with not letting my emotions get the best of me, and there are some days where I want nothing more than to cut my stress away, but I've learned how to reach out and ask for help. Being a full-time student with extracurriculars and trying to have a social life while dealing with depression and anxiety has been extremely difficult, yet I wouldn't change a thing. The experiences I've had and the people I've met have truly changed me for the better. I've had the privilege of being surrounded with some of the most supportive people, and for that I am forever grateful. Luckily, I am fortunate enough to have extremely supportive parents who help me to the best of their capabilities every day, and not to mention my friends who keep me sane even when I don't feel it. I also create a lot of art. The time I get to escape and just draw something is something I cherish the most. Art has become my way of interacting with the world, a way for me to express my innermost thoughts and feelings. One of the biggest issues is not everyone is as fortunate. There are far too many of us who aren't taken seriously or told to get over it. Such mentality shames those who are affected into suffering in silence. Too afraid to speak up against the perceptions of what living with mental illness is like, they would rather allow the darkness to feed off them than draw attention to the problem. The stigma surrounding mental health is very real. The shame and fear created can be seen in a multitude of ways over numerous years. That shame exists to this day. The ignorance surrounding mental health and wellness prevents so many from reaching out and getting the help they deserve. Unfortunately, the number of stressors in the lives of teenagers is only increasing, leading more and more of us to break down. Looking around my high school, it's a rare day when someone or another isn't on the verge of a mental breakdown due to unstable emotions and stress. Yet very few are willing to speak up and get help. Why? Because we're afraid of stereotypes, of being told to toughen up and handle it. Or worst of all, so what? It's just high school. Watch out for the real world. What many seem to forget is that if mental health needs of teens aren't appropriately met, some of us won't make it to the real world. This ignorance is due to a lack of education. Mental health is often tucked away in the health curriculum, and focusing on definitions, not real-life situations, is adding to the stigmatization. This is a shame, especially when there are so many resources available. From school psychologists to organizations like ASHA International, there is a way to help, but we just aren't accessing it. By allowing this culture to go on, we are allowing this shameful stigma to go on. It's time we open up a dialogue among each other and combat the shame once and for all. As a society, we need to wake up and realize that mental illness left untreated can have drastic consequences. Living with mental illness can leave you crippled in self-doubt and hatred, and it can also lead to insomnia, trouble concentrating, and mood swings. Yet a lot of the symptoms and consequences are unnoticed by us because they can't be visibly seen. We're quick to sympathize with those who have physical ailments. isn't it time we extend that same empathy to those with mental illnesses? Suicide is the second leading cause of death among the ages of 10 to 24, yet that fact is almost never discussed. It's time to start a conversation on mental wellness. The lives of our youth depend on it. You could be the one to open up a discussion, whether it be joining an organization like ASHA International or even just sparking a dialogue within your close friends. For me, speaking here today is an amazing opportunity to advocate for a cause that I care deeply about. No matter how you advocate, every voice counts towards the opening of a broader discussion. Another resource is starting right in schools, training teachers to look out for students in distress, teaching kids about mental health, helping them understand that what they're feeling doesn't make them an outcast or a freak, and then providing them with resources that allow for further help. Showing kids multiple avenues of support to help them feel less alone, and personally, I found that depression made me feel so isolated that any kind of support helped me tremendously. Even just keeping an open mind is one of the best ways to help. By listening and just being there for someone, even if you don't relate, can be extremely powerful. Simply being a good listener could save someone's life. I found that just talking about my depression made me feel better, and I could never thank those who listened enough. Finally, I would like to thank you all for being here. Please use this event as a stepping stone to further educate yourselves and join the fight against destigmatizing mental illness. It's so important now more than ever to engage in a healthy dialogue, and hopefully for many of us that starts today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamini. I see some of our guests standing. There's room in the front. Please come have a seat. Get comfortable. Well, as Yamini was saying, we must start a conversation about mental health, especially in our schools and colleges, and create that bright future for our children. 1 in 5 of our children is struggling with a mental health condition, and nearly 80% of them are not finding the help and the care that they need. We must change that. Mental health conditions are a leading impediment, not just to students in high schools, but colleges across the world as well. And when left untreated, they can lead to school failure, family conflict, substance abuse, violence, juvenile and criminal justice involvement, and suicide. We have taken Yamini's advice to our hearts. And this year alone, ASHA International, through our Let's Talk About Mental Health program in high schools, will be reaching nearly 700 high school students. And the feedback, thank you. And the feedback that we are receiving from the students are so heartwarming. The first and foremost thing that they tell us is that they no longer feel alone, that they too can talk about it. And we hear over and over again, oh my God, your stories remind us that mental health, mental illness, suicide is nothing to be making jokes about. This is serious. It is a matter of life and death. And so we are glad to be making a difference. Yamini is a member of the ASHA Storytellers team, and she wants to engage schools and empower youth to take charge of their own mental health and well-being. Thanks again, Yamini. Thank you. Our 5th storyteller, Darrell Walker, and I bonded over cars. Standing on the sidewalk on a beautiful spring evening last year, following a keynote that I had presented at Cascadia's Diversity Day, I asked Darrell what inspired him to pursue a career in mental health. I was so moved by his story that I asked him to come share his story, and I was thrilled when Darrell agreed. Dr. Darrell Walker is the president and CEO of Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, the largest nonprofit organization delivering whole healthcare, integrated mental health and addiction services, primary care, and housing to support our communities, provide hope, and improve well-being for those they serve. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Darrell Walker.
Thank you. Thank you. My goal tonight is to get through this without having either a panic attack or crying. But no promises. We'll see. There's a bit of a dark part of my story, but there's a lot of hope also. My childhood and very best friend killed himself when we lived together as freshmen roommates in college. Noel is his name. And he lives with me in ways that I really can't adequately explain every day since September 24th, 1967. It shocked me and changed my life forever. My job during Noel's long-suffering years of depression prior to his death was to keep Noel alive. There were many serious attempts prior to that final day. My job was a 24/7 job, and I took it very seriously. I did it with great passion, dedication, and I was very proud of that job. And then I failed. I failed really badly. At the age of barely 19, I was a failure at the very only real purpose in my life: keeping Noel alive, keeping him from literally pulling that trigger. His death brought me to my knees and pushed me through decades of my own serious depression, through awful panic periods, all during which I thought I might die from the pain and always, always tremendous guilt that to this day I live with. Guilt is simply part of who I am. It's a thoughtful guilt, and given Noel's desperate and failed effort to reach out to me in order for me to once again pull him off the edge, hours just before his death, this guilt makes perfect sense to me for reasons I won't go into tonight. Those few hours still haunt me to this day. When you fail at your job, a sense of guilt may very well be a natural part of the outcome. If any of you have the urge to rush up to me and tell me not to feel guilty, I understand your need to do so. But honestly, if you need to do it for yourself. I'm at peace with my guilt, or pretty much as I ever will be. Out of this deep-seated guilt and horrible loss of someone I loved intensely came the single seminal moment in my entire life. Most of what is important to me as I stand here tonight pivots around this terrible, tragic, violent ending, and from it, an important beginning. September 24th, 1967. I've been ruminating about standing here tonight in front of you and telling my story in a way I never have for a good part of the last year. I struggle with intense sense of introversion, a sense of never quite measuring up, and most of my life has been spent faking competence in just about everything I've done. Although in all outward appearances and also in my, quote, thinking brain, in many ways, I'm really not a failure after all. I have a PhD in psychology with a specialty in suicidology, of course. Years spent as a CEO for various companies and a leader in the field of mental health and its related complexities. There are lots of goals that I've met and accomplished in the past. One goal that I've had for many years is exactly what I'm doing right now, and it's been unmet until tonight. And that is to stand in front of you and talk about the hellish guilt, the emotional pain, my own mental illness, if you choose to call it that, and the learning that comes from all of that, of the important talking, all the lessons of talking about it, the subject that even today is often a secret for far too many of us. I'm surrounded in my work by many professionals in the field of mental health that keep their journeys through their own emotional hell secret. Some of them, in all probability, living that secret hell right now. And I close tonight by asking for what reason. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Darrell. It's hard for me to keep my composure because it's been a long journey from the isolation cell at OHSU to this podium today. But what has sustained me is not just Aida's story, but the stories of everyone that you're hearing today and the stories that you may never hear that I have had the privilege of listening to. And Darrell, you are my hero. I know how hard this has been for you, but this is the power of stories. When a person stands up like Aida and shares her story, she gave me the courage to share my story around the world. All I wanted to do was to reach out and give hope to one person. And Aida's story has helped me reach more than 50,000 people, and we've only begun. And so I decided a year ago, if one person's story could reach 50,000 people and more, how about a lot of wonderful, incredible, brave storytellers like tonight? Just imagine the difference we can make. We're not done quite yet. Thank you so much, Darrell. Thank you again. I really hope that your bravery tonight is going to inspire CEOs and leaders across the world to stand up and own their own truth. There is power in it. Thank you, Darrell. Our sixth storyteller, Jennifer Yamashiro, was always drawn to community service. She grew up with a single mother and had a passion for helping others. But nobody knew that she struggled with depression herself throughout her life. She didn't want to burden those around her. She thought that it was how things were supposed to be. Then Jennifer was given the opportunity to play the role of Diana in the musical Next to Normal, and life changed forever. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jennifer Yamashiro.
Thank you. Well, as Gayatri said, I grew up in a fairly unstable household. My mom married and divorced 4 times. I changed schools every single year until I was in the 8th grade. And I spent much of my life feeling as though I was on the outside looking in. I had to help raise my sister and brother because my mom was either working or dating. And our dad chose his new life with his new wife and her daughter over us. I survived by hiding how I felt. I had to be strong for my sister and brother, and often my mother. I longed to be loved and accepted for who I was, but learned early on that people preferred the happy me over the real me. The one who struggled with depression and anxiety. I wasn't able to articulate that was what I was feeling as a child and a teenager, but I know now that that's what it was. I learned that my job was to hold everything together, and I couldn't do that if I was falling apart. Theater was my escape. It gave me a chance to crawl inside someone else's head. I could feel all of my feelings without having to really own them. They belonged to the character I was playing, and I became an expert at acting no matter what situation I was in. When my kids were in 5th and 3rd grade, my depression and anxiety were almost unbearable. After my then husband left for work, I would get my kids ready for school, and once everyone was gone, I would spend the day on the couch, unable to do anything. I lost interest in doing the things I loved most. I was directing a musical at the school with more than 60 kids, and I was the PTO president at the time, but nobody knew. I had become a master at hiding my bouts of depression, but this one was the worst. I had no interest in doing the things that I normally would do. I had no interest in doing the things that normally filled me up. I had taken a break from theater to spend more time with my kids, but not taking that time for myself and doing what filled my soul was hugely detrimental. I thought I had to give up everything that I loved to be a good mother. I didn't realize that taking time for myself was crucial to my own well-being. A good friend figured out what was going on, and she talked to me about it. She noticed that I had consistently been declining time with my friends, which was really weird for me because I love spending time with my friends. So I told her what was going on, and I felt so ashamed when I had to tell her I was struggling with depression. I was worried that she would think I wasn't worthy anymore. I was worried she would think I was crazy, but the opposite happened. She shared her struggles with me. She told me that she had been on antidepressants for some time. And she told me that many of our friends struggled with the same thing, but nobody wanted to talk about it. She encouraged me to talk to my doctor. And after seeing him, I went on a low-dose antidepressant and slowly started to claw my way out. I had given up performing to focus on my kids, but decided it was time for me to do the one thing that feeds my soul. And 6 months later, I was cast in a local production of Annie and worked with my doctor to start weaning myself off of the medication. We agreed I was ready. And then 2 years ago, I had the honor of being in a musical called Next to Normal. I played Diana, a woman who struggles with bipolar disorder. The story focuses not only on her struggles, but how it affects the people she loves when she was working to find the best path to healing. A local newspaper, the Oregonian, did a story focused on me and 2 of my cast members and our own struggles with anxiety and depression. The outpouring of support from my friends and family as a result of that story was overwhelming and humbling. There were so many people in my life who struggled with depression too. We just all kept that part of ourselves hidden away. When my youngest son was about 4 years old, he shut the car door on his finger, and he had a pretty deep cut and his fingernail came off. It felt better when it was covered with a Band-Aid, but there came a time when we had to take it off and expose it to the light. But it was so painful for him to have it exposed to the light like that at first. But being uncovered in the light is what started the healing process. We don't have to struggle with our pain alone in the darkness. My depression and anxiety are still a daily struggle. I can recognize the warning signs and triggers, and I have tools to help me get through in a healthy way. I have people in my life who love me and who ask me how I'm doing, expecting an honest answer. I serve on a community theater board of directors and try to perform in 1 show a year when there's time. When I feel my anxiety bubbling up, I stop and breathe. I also started running, which helps me, give me opportunity to be with my thoughts and explore where I'm at emotionally. When I'm out on a run, I can take a temperature of where I'm at and how I'm feeling, and then try to find a solution and reach out to the people who love me the most to help have them hold me accountable and help me to deal with any issues that are bubbling up. So far, I haven't had to go back on my medication, but I know it might happen again, and I'm okay with that. I had spent so much time working so hard to convey a false image of perfection. I thought that's what was expected. I kept my struggles hidden because I was ashamed, and I assumed nobody else would understand. But once I exposed my pain to the light, my healing began. It was painful, and it wasn't easy. If you struggle with depression or anxiety, please don't keep it hidden. You aren't alone. Find someone you trust and share your struggles with them. You will most likely find that others in your life have very similar struggles. And if you are someone who a person confides in, please just love them where they're at. Listen to them, support them, encourage them to get help, and then follow up with them to make sure that that's what they're doing. So many struggle in silence and darkness. But as we continue to work together to remove the stigma that's associated with depression and anxiety, we will create a community that sees the strength in exposing depression and anxiety and pain to the light. Join me in helping to create a community that is a safe place for people to reach out for help. We can work together to ensure that no one will suffer alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. You're absolutely right. None of us need to struggle alone in the dark, and every one of us need to talk about our struggles so we can bring it into the light and begin the journey to healing. Depression is a leading cause of disability around the world. According to the World Health Organization, 350 million men, women, and children are struggling with depression, and many of them do not receive the care they need. Jennifer is a member of the ASHA Storytellers team, and she wants to help end the stigma surrounding depression and create a safe community where people can seek the help they need. Our next storyteller, Dave Mowry, is on a mission to shatter stigma one joke at a time. Thank God for some relief, huh? Once a successful businessman and entrepreneur, Dave's life descended into darkness due to his struggles with bipolar disorder and extreme anxiety. He calls these 14 years of suffering his lost years. Years later, Dave took up stand-up comedy, a class for stand-up comedy for people with mental health challenges, and everything changed. Today, he shares his humor by teaching stand-up comedy to others with mental health conditions, performing, writing books, and writing for BP Magazine, and speaking to local, state, and national groups. Dave recently published his book, OMG, That's Me. What started out as a couple of blog posts blossomed soon into a following of over 200,000 people who have all read and been touched by Dave's stories. Welcome, Dave.
Hello. There is humor in my stories, and no, really, I want you to laugh. So my job tonight is to tell you my story, and part of my story is that I live with bipolar disorder and severe anxiety, which is interesting because I also live in Happy Valley. But Happy Valley is really a misnomer. There is no valley. And having a mental illness, I am sensitive to discrimination. And I see discrimination where regular people might not. Take happy hour, for instance. I think that's being discriminatory. There should also be a crappy hour for depressed people. Bipolar people could go to both. And having a mental illness and being single is challenging. You want to have a relationship, but when do you tell somebody you like that you live with mental illness? On the first date? Too soon. If you wait till after the third date, too long, and you're not being honest. So I came up with a solution. There should be a dating service for people with mental illness. I can see the postings now. Paranoid white male seeks paranoid white female to share compound in Idaho. Or paranoid female seeks male with no government connections. Or my favorite, dual personality female seeks dual personality male for double dates. When I was first diagnosed, my kids were small, and it was important that we talked about it, so we sat around the kitchen table and we talked about it. And the next day, my daughter Megan went to school. She was in first grade, and in art, she was drawing. And her teacher came up to her and looked over her shoulder and said, "Megan, that's interesting. What are you drawing?" And Megan said, "It's a bipolar bear." And the teacher looked at it and said, "Well, can you tell me about it?" And Megan said, "Sure, it's white. It lives at the North Pole, and it takes Prozac." There's also a story that actually was not one that I wrote, but a part of what I wrote. But I saw it on a TED Talk, and it's about Sarah. And it's similar to the one about Megan, but Sarah was in second grade, and she was drawing. And the teacher came up to her and said, "Sarah, what are you drawing?" And Sarah said, "It's a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But Sarah, nobody knows what God looks like." And Sarah said, "They will in a minute." But there was a time when my illness was so bad that I could barely get out of bed. And if I did get out of bed, I could barely make it to the couch. And if I made it to the couch, it was everything I could do just to sit, just to be, just to hold it together, and just to exist. And this went on for several months. And then one day my wife packed a bag, and she came up to me and she said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Sure." But I was confused. I thought we were going on a vacation. She took me to the hospital. And on the second day, I met with a psychiatrist, and he said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Well, not too bad, but the service here sucks. I ordered margarita when I got here, and it still hasn't arrived yet." he wrote something down in his pad, and then he said, well, do you know where you are? And I said, well, my wife said it was going to be a surprise. I'm hoping St. Thomas. No, he said, it's St. Vincent's. I said, oh, can I get that margarita now? But one day, at my lowest, and this is a serious part of my talk, one story. One day at my lowest, I went to a small park that's not far from here, and I sat on a picnic table, and the sun was at an angle where the water, there was a stream, and the sun sparkled off the water. And as I sat there with a gun in my hand, and I wanted so much to end the suffering, to end the pain. But I'm one of the lucky ones. I realized at a certain point that ending my life would solve my suffering and give me peace, but it would leave my family with guilt. And I knew this because my father had committed suicide. But in my story, even suicide can have humor to it. Today, I deal with those thoughts of suicide with humor. And my wife Heather has been really, really, really supportive. And one example is that when things were really bad, I decided to end it all. So I went into the bathroom and I took a bunch of pills. Afterwards, I called Heather for help. She said there are more pills under the sink. Very helpful. But living with bipolar disorder is hard. The ups and downs are hard. The depression is awful. But in between the highs and the lows, there is some relief. But for me, the severe anxiety was the worst. It was constant, and it was awful, and it never went away. And one of the ways that my anxiety manifested itself was that if I went into a public restroom and anybody else was in there, I couldn't go. I'd go up to the urinal and I'd stand there and I'd try, but it wouldn't work. I couldn't go. I was sure everybody was staring at me or everybody was judging me. So I'd go out in the hallway and wait for maybe 5 minutes or sometimes for half an hour until nobody was in the restroom, and then I'd go in and I'd be able to go. And then about 3 months ago, Heather and I went to see a movie. And after the movie, I went into the restroom and there were other people in there, and I went up to the urinal and I went. And it's at that point that I realized how far I'd come. And I stepped back from the urinal and I went, yes, yes, yes! The other people in the restroom looked at me like I was crazy. I said, no, not anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Humor is healing. Dave serves on the board of ASHA International and is a member of the ASHA Storytellers team. According to the American Federation for Suicide Prevention, men die by suicide nearly 4 times as often as women. Yet, men find it hard many times to share their struggles and ask for the help they need. Dave wants to change that, one joke at a time. Our next storyteller, Megan Kahi, is the Senior Director of Peer and Wellness Services at Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare. She's on the faculty of Portland State University, where she trains peer wellness specialists. She's also the Clinical Director at the Oregon Health and Science University Psychiatry Department and the Vice Chair of the Oregon Health Authority Traditional Health Worker Commission. As a painter, her work has been featured in museums and galleries in California, Texas, and Oregon. She is currently represented by the J. Pepin Art Gallery in Portland. Megan's passion for her work comes from having been hospitalized over 100 times and finding the ability to recover and thrive despite a psychiatric diagnosis. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Megan Kahi.
Thank you. So, art is the highest form of hope. Again, art is the highest form of hope. Now, why am I saying that? Gayatri just said I'm a painter. Okay. So I'm going to explain this a little bit in more detail. When I was 19, I was away at school for the first time, and I was going to study art. And I was sitting in an art history class in an auditorium bigger than this one. I was way up in the back. They were showing slides of all the famous art. But I started hearing a voice, actually voices, saying how bad I was and saying terrible things to me. And I ran out of the auditorium, but it didn't stop. And it went on for days, and I was going across the campus, and a student was walking towards me, and I looked at her face, and she looked like a giant insect. It was awful. Eventually, when I was outside in the snow coming down without shoes or coats, some of the other students took me to the student health center. And I spent there about 3 days on very heavy-duty medication. This was 40 years ago, so, you know, Thorazine, really heavy-duty medication. And then I saw the psychiatrist, and he said, "You have schizophrenia." And I just remember he had nose hair, and his eyebrows stuck up like this, and it was like his eyes were bloodshot. And I thought, he's not very smart. But anyway, that was my diagnosis, and it did sound like a death sentence. And so that was 40 years ago. So as Gayatri mentioned, I've been hospitalized a whole lot. So over the next 30 years, I was going in and out of the hospital, and my quality of life got really severely terrible. And I started making attempts on my life. And over, I would take pills. I would wash it down with a half bottle of wine. The EMTs would come rescue me, take me to the hospital, back and forth, back and forth. I knew that there was going to come a time when the EMTs and the sheriff did not get to me in time, and I would succeed in killing myself. Now, how I went from there to the next step is beyond what I can tell you about right now, but what I want you to hear is that in the middle of all that, I got in touch with my will to live, with the life force inside me. I had been cultivating it all my life, I think, in small bits, but I found it. And my paintings had been always very painful, and I put all my emotions in my paintings, and they were black and agonizing figures. But I went to my studio, took a brush of cadmium red paint, and just started painting lotuses. Now, why a lotus? Okay, here's your trivia for tonight. A lotus is a beautiful flower, and they have so much life force that if you take 40 of them and hook them up to a certain electrical apparatus, thank you. If you hook them up to a certain electrical apparatus, it will actually be enough juice to illuminate a light bulb, and that's a plant. So that's part of why I love the lotuses. When I'm doing paintings of lotuses, it's wonderful to paint the flower part, but the really interesting part is the background, which is actually the mud. Lotuses have to have mud to bloom and thrive. They can't do it just, like other plants. They have to have this organic, sticky, gooey mud. And isn't that like our lives? That's like my life. Now when I'm training peer wellness specialists, I say, be like the lotus, sink your roots down into the mud of your lives, and that is how you will bloom and grow. So the lotus is a powerful metaphor, and this is tonight a lot about hope. But let me just say, there are times when hope can be in short supply. I'm being very honest about that. It's been like that kind of for me sometimes lately. And what I want to do is tell you about what to do when hope is in short supply. First of all, I had a friend recently tell me, when we were talking about hope and courage, she said, you can have hope. If you're building a fire, hope is the the kindling that you put on the bottom, and then courage is the match that you ignite that and build the fire with. And that's very, I think that makes sense. But sometimes hope is very hard to find. And I just want to tell you a different story. It's not even a story, it's just about a plant that I saw when I was out walking a few days ago in my neighborhood. My service dog is up in the back, and she's here with me tonight. But I was walking her like I do every morning, and going along down the sidewalk, and there in the middle of the cement, this tiny, wee little purple and yellow violet. How it got there, I have no idea. It didn't have the things that plants normally need to grow. It didn't have soil, it didn't have whatever it needed, but it was there blooming for me that morning. I don't know if it was blooming for me, but I saw it, I celebrated it, and that little flower has courage. That is courage. And so with that image, I'd like to close, but I just want to say, may we all support each other through hope, and may we all have courage. Thank you.
Love you. Thank you, Megan. I agree with you. Like the lotus, out of the muddy waters of our life, we can rise into beautiful blossoms. Oftentimes, the diagnosis of schizophrenia is met with fear and despair. Megan is the living proof that our diagnosis does not need to define us or deter us from living a life of meaning and purpose. Megan is an advisor to the board of ASHA International and a member of the ASHA Storytellers team. She wants to inspire people living with mental health conditions to rediscover their life force and create lives of meaning and purpose. Our next storyteller, Kelly Wilson, is an author and comedian who entertains and inspires with stories of humor, healing, and hope. Her latest book, Caskets from Costco, has been chosen as a finalist in the 18th Annual Forwards Review's IndieFab Book of the Year Awards. Kelly's work has also been featured in a variety of anthologies and has been published in a wide range of work for both children and adults. Her work has been featured in the Huffington Post, Feminine Collective, and Sweatpants and Coffee, among others. As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, Kelly writes and speaks about finding hope in the process of recovery. Can you please help me welcome Kelly Wilson?
Oh, hello. I am Kelly Wilson. I am the one that talks about the stuff that nobody wants to talk about, like the consequences of my lactose intolerance, the state of the toilets in my boys' bathroom. The really funny part about that is that they're here, and I didn't know that when I wrote this. And I also talk about the effects of trauma and the reality of suicide. I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety, and I've struggled with wanting to die because the pain and hopelessness has felt overwhelming. What stopped me? You did. Okay, well, not literally you, but my connections, my relationships. Those in my support system who are not afraid of me and who are not afraid of the word suicide. Friends and family members who talk with me and spend time with me and make sure that I am okay, regardless of what I'm going through. So many of us suffer silently with thoughts of suicide. We never talk about it, not with our friends, not with our colleagues, not with our family. These, we, are the 1 in 4 people who live with mental health challenges in the United States. And of that population, as many as 57% do not receive any treatment. Why? Because we are afraid. When I first started talking and writing and even joking about my own post-traumatic stress disorder, people would assume that I had been in the military. This is what people know right now about PTSD. I would answer, no, I hadn't served my country. And the next question always is, then why do you have PTSD? I hesitate a fraction of a second, and I stand a little bit taller. I take a deep breath, and I say, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And there is always a flinch. This isn't what people expect. This isn't what we talk about, but we need to talk about it. Last fall, I had a significant and serious mental breakdown. I left my husband and children, moved out of my house, lived with friends, and then on my own for a while. I sank into a deep, dark depression. My medication had stopped working. Along with additional stressors in my life, I felt suicidal. I told the friends I was living with, I called my doctor, I called my therapist, and I got help. I tell you this part of my story because even for me, talking with others about suicide is difficult, and I find that incredibly ironic. I am open with my story and my mental health challenges, and many times people contact me with questions. Some of them are, I want to write my story, how can I get started? Or how have you made it through to this point in your life? And how do I get through this terrible depression? I received a question like this from a friend of mine from our junior high days, so she has a lot of dirt on me. And a loved one of hers had died. And her grief was so intense, it was so powerful, like nothing else she had dealt with before. And it was not letting up. It was tears and suffering and hopelessness for days. And she asked me how she was going to get through it, how I have gotten through these times in my life. And that's where the hope comes from, isn't it? Knowing that mental health challenges are real and they're treatable. I wasn't sure about the circumstances of her situation at the time, and she sounded so distraught that I knew I had to ask that one question. My stomach dropped and my palms grew sweaty, and I stared at the message on my computer screen. I did not want to ask her. I knew I had to ask her, and I had these thoughts, but she'll think I'm crazy. She'll get mad, or she'll be offended, or she'll never talk to me again. But I thought about my own experiences and the people in my life, my relationships, my connections, and I very slowly typed out, "Do you feel suicidal?" And I waited. The cursor blinked on the computer screen, and then there were those 3 little dots, and I waited, and it felt like an eternity. "No," she finally typed. "Thank you for asking me that." I took a breath, and our conversation continued, and I ended up giving her the National Suicide Hotline number anyway. It's always good to have. And trust me, the irony of this experience was not lost on me. And it hit me, if I am so afraid after my experiences of asking that one question, then there are more people out there who are afraid to ask it. This fear is the stigma that holds us back from not only talking about suicide, but any of our mental health challenges. The flinch when I tell people about my post-traumatic stress disorder, or when people say that anxiety isn't a real diagnosis, or that depression is just having the blues. But when we are honest, when we confront stigma and talk about these issues openly, people can get the treatment they need to recover and thrive. According to the National Advisory Mental Health Council, the treatment success rate for depression is between 65 and 80%. For bipolar disorder, 80%. Addiction, 70%. Schizophrenia, 60%. We owe it to ourselves and to each other to break through the stigma and connect about our mental health challenges. Remember when I said that it was you who helped prevent my suicide attempt? And then I said, okay, not literally you. The thing is, you can help someone in your life get the help and the treatment and the hope that they need. We can all learn to talk about the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Adverse childhood experiences, including emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, emotional and physical neglect, domestic violence, mental or substance use disorders amongst family members, parental separation or divorce, a family member being incarcerated, death or suicide of a loved one, can adversely impact the physical, mental, and social well-being of our children throughout their lifetime, regardless of gender, race, or socioeconomic status. For example, more than half of the women in publicly funded mental health and substance use treatment report a history of trauma, with their abuse most commonly occurring in childhood. Kelly is a member of the ASHA Storytellers team, and she wants to help end the stigma surrounding childhood sexual abuse and mental illness. She wants us all to talk about the things that we don't want to talk about, and she wants to advocate for trauma-informed care. Thank you, Kelly. Our final storyteller tonight is Becca Miles. Being diagnosed with depression was the last thing Becca wanted to hear. She was in the middle of her undergraduate degree when it became hard to cope with life. Depression had been something she struggled with since early adolescence, but those feelings she experienced became her new normal. When she heard the diagnosis, she began her journey to uncover who she really was under the facade of someone who held it all together. After lots of thought and fear of judgment, she decided to take a leap of faith and open up about her depression over social media via a picture of her fresh tattoo paired with a powerful message. Her only wish was to reach one person struggling like she was. But she soon found that her words resonated with millions of people around the world. And with that one Facebook post, she started a global conversation. Welcome, Becca.
Hello. My name is Becca Miles, and I want to tell you a story. I was a sophomore in college when I hit my rock bottom. I struggled with daily tasks, like getting out of bed, showering, or even eating. It was extremely difficult just to get myself to class every day, if I even went at all. I just wanted to walk into traffic, and I didn't care if I lived or died. However, I was lucky enough to be living with my best friend at that time, and she helped me go to our university's health and counseling center, and I am so grateful to have had the availability of those resources. November of 2014, that same sophomore year, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. I had a difficult time accepting this as my reality because I was going to school for psychology. I wanted to help people, like me. But how was I supposed to help others when I couldn't even help myself? I started weekly therapy, but I was really resistant. All my life, I felt like I had to do things on my own with help from no one, because I felt that I had to do that a lot for myself while growing up. I thought I could just dig myself out of this hole of sadness that I was stuck in. I didn't want anyone's help. I went months and months with no improvement. I felt like I was only coasting through my life and not actually living it. The following January, I stopped going to therapy because it wasn't helping anyway. To no surprise, I still didn't feel any better. Thankfully, that spring semester, I had a class with a professor who opened up about their own struggles with depression and how it had been a battle for years. That person was someone that so many people looked up to, myself included. She always appeared peppy, energetic, and was tons of fun. Not someone you would imagine if you heard the word depression. I thought if she could openly share her story to a class full of students, complete strangers, maybe opening up about my own struggles to one person wasn't so bad. I decided to meet with this professor, and she helped me take the steps I needed to get back into therapy and start some medication, and I began my journey into feeling better. After several weeks of adjusting to new meds and countless sessions in therapy where I struggled to open up because it made me so emotional, I finally began to see a little bit of light back in my life. In therapy and in my own studies as a psychology major, I came to realize that I had been struggling with depression and anxiety for longer than I had originally thought. I was finally able to pinpoint when it all started, grade school and into middle school. Because I was experiencing these things from a young age, I thought what I was feeling my whole life was just normal. It turns out, people actually enjoy living each day. That summer, 2015, I decided that I wanted a tattoo, but I really wanted it to mean something to me. I decided on a design that represented my journey with mental health and depression. I found a design that captured my depression perfectly, an ambigram. An ambigram reads something from one direction, but when flipped upside down, it reads something, whether it's the same or a completely different word or phrase. The design that I found reads, "I'm fine," one direction, and the other side reads, "Save me." To me, it spoke the truth. "I'm fine" was always the response I defaulted to whenever someone asked me how I was doing. Except I actually knew there was more going on, that I was struggling to keep my head above the water. This design represented the facade I put forth all the time. The night I got my tattoo, I decided to snap a couple pictures of it, one from each angle. I sat down and wrote what depression looked like in my life. I paired my words and the picture that captured my mental health, then posted it to Facebook with hardly a second thought. I decided to share my tattoo with my friends and family with the hope that just one person could find help in it, much like my professor did for me. This is part of what I wrote. To me, depression is the days that I feel sad for no reason. Depression is the mornings that I don't feel capable of getting out of bed. Depression is the sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Depression is the homework that I never completed simply because I didn't feel like I was capable. Depression is the breakdowns I have over absolutely nothing. Depression is the eating too much or eating too little. Depression is the nights I begin to cry because I feel so overwhelmed, even though everything is going right. Depression is the 50 pounds I carry in my chest at all times. Depression is the need to constantly be distracted, whether that's being on social media, playing video games, watching movies or show, or working all the time, because I can't trust myself with my thoughts for longer than 3 minutes. Depression is the friendships that have suffered because of my inability to function. Depression is the hurtful thoughts and actions I have towards myself. Depression is the tears I have because I don't know why I feel so worthless when I know I should feel happy. What followed was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I had so many friends and family commenting and sharing their own stories and thanking me for talking about such a difficult topic. But then the post started getting shares and then more shares. Soon enough, it was people I didn't even know. By midweek, it went international. I had people from all over the world commenting and messaging me, sharing their own stories, and so many people saying that they never knew the words to describe how they were feeling, but that I had captured it. In just 4 months, my post reached over 24 million views. Now the post currently has over 450,000 likes and over 350,000 shares. And that does not include the countless articles that have been made and shared about the post. You Google my name, pages. It's insane. That's what I have dedicated my life to. I want to share my story to all who will listen, because not reaching out or seeking help that is needed can be lethal. ASHA International aims to give mental health a face and a voice. That is why I'm standing up here tonight, opening up, being transparent, vulnerable in many eyes. It changed not only my life, but so many others. I challenge all of you to open your eyes and ears to those around you. I found strength in my vulnerability. I saw bravery in the hundreds of thousands of people sharing their own battles. I saw people transform their lives, all because one person opened up. Can you imagine the impact if we all did? Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. Becca is the recipient of ASHA International's 2016 Hopebringer Award and a member of the ASHA Storytellers team. As Becca's story demonstrates to all of us, one person's story can touch and transform the lives of millions of people. Can you imagine the collective impact we could all have if every single person, every man, woman, and child that is struggling with a mental health condition were to stand up and share their struggle and their strength? Can you just imagine the impact we could have? Ladies and gentlemen, as ASHA International Storytellers, we believe our story is our superpower. Through our stories, we can give mental health a face and a voice. Through our stories, we can give hope to people struggling with a mental health condition that they are not alone, and empower them to get the help they need to recover and thrive. Through our stories, we can advocate for public policies that provide healthcare and social supports for those that are struggling with a mental health condition. Through our stories, we can build communities of respect, dignity, empathy, and inclusion, where every single person living with a mental health condition can realize their fullest potential. We have ASHA Storytellers cards out there on the lobby at our resource table, along with many mental health and wellness resources, including a very simple 12 questions checklist that every single one of us should be asking about our own mental health and well-being. Please help yourself to all the resources there. Pick up as many of the storyteller cards as you need and share it with the principals and counselors at your child's school and college. Give it to your managers and the CEOs in your workplace and the community leaders in your community. Invite our storytellers to share their stories at your child's school, college, workplace, organization. Together we can start the conversation about mental health, end stigma, and save lives. To learn more about ASHA International Storytellers Program and all of our other programs, I invite you to visit us at myasha.org. Dear friends, thank you all for coming tonight. Please share the stories you heard here tonight with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues. You never know, you might just change a life, perhaps even save a life. Now, will you please welcome our storytellers? Megan Kahi, Jennifer Pepin, Yamini Rajan, Molly McNabb, Grace, Beverly, Kelly Wilson, Jennifer Yamashiro, Becca Miles, Dave Murray, Darrell Walker. Please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. My dear storytellers, thanks to each and every one of you for sharing your story. We at ASHA International, and I'm sure every single one of our guests here agree, we salute your grit and grace, we celebrate your resilience, and we honor your humanity. Thank you so very much.